I'm Don Amero, and this is Through the Fire, a podcast about overcoming adversity, reframing misfortune, and celebrating courage. On this show, you're going to meet some really incredible people who have been through some heavy stuff, but they've come through the other side. And the hope is that you're encouraged and inspired by the words that you hear. Today, I'm welcoming a friend, a mentor, and fellow singer-songwriter who's got 30 years of stories and songs to share from his career. So we're going to be here for a long time. He's been somebody who's been inspiring me for a long time. We hung out just yesterday, and I want to introduce you to my dear friend, Steve Bell. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine, thanks.
Well, thanks for joining us on Through the Fire. I want to start off with, I think it's a hilarious story when I look back at it now, the story of how we met. So 20-some years ago, 22 years ago or so, I used to work at a cafe down Henderson called the Grace Cafe. I hadn't known of your music before then. My wife, Pam, well, she wasn't my wife at the time, but my coworker, Pam, she would play this Steve Bell guy all the time as the morning we were getting coffee and stuff ready. And she would tell me all about Steve and being to your concerts and stuff. And then I went and saw you live for the first time maybe a year or two later. And I got it. I understood why people loved Steve Bell so much. Fantastic storyteller. So then this sounds like a man crush happening here, but I got really, really interested in your journey and watching you on stage, just how comfortable you were. I remember a mutual friend of ours once said, Dave White, he said, when people leave a Steve Bell concert, they don't go, we went and saw Steve Bell last night. They say, I saw Steve. And everybody knew who they meant. Everybody knew who you were.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because they felt close to you, and because you've always endeared yourself to your audience. And so, long story short, we bumped into each other a couple times. I think at Winnipeg Folk Festival, in an elevator somewhere downtown. And you didn't really know who I was. But one day, this is where it gets funny. My mother-in-law and I went to see you at a concert here in Winnipeg. It was minus 40 outside. About 14 people showed up to the concert because absolutely terrible. People's cars couldn't start, whatever. It was just terrible. And I'm thinking in my head, tonight's the night I get to go say hi to Steve because there's not going to be a lineup to see you after the show.
Right.
So my mother-in-law, we come up to you and I said, and I was about to be like, hey, Steve, big fan. And my mother-in-law goes, Steve, this is my son. He's my son-in-law. He's a very big fan of yours and he's a musician too. And I immediately went like, man, how many people go up to Steve every day and say, my son's a musician? And I was just like, hi, Steve, see you later. And I just walked away, just deflated in that moment. And we somehow, you continued to allow me into your sphere. One night you saw me at a concert and you said, hey, is that Don Amero? You invited me on stage.
Yeah,
and I think that opened the gates.
That.
Yeah.
I think that's the first time I actually heard, I think I'd heard maybe some recording of you. And so I knew like you could pull off a song, but there you were sitting there and I said, I don't know what possessed me. I said, come and do a song. And so you came up, grabbed my guitar, looked at my audience. I think you did 2 songs and it was you just kind of stole their hearts. And that's when I kind of, okay, he's all right, this guy. So,
and that was probably 12 years ago, maybe 12 or something.
I would say
years
at
ago.
least,
Yeah. And since then, we've been following each other's careers. I went on the road with you for a little while back in about 7 years ago.
Yeah, we did what a good dozen or so dates. Yeah, right out to the East Coast. Did we go West Coast?
I think it was just East. Yeah, we did about maybe 10 or 12 dates. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. That's fun.
Which was incredible. Like just again, getting those stories firsthand in the back of the van. Some we can't share here, but
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a storied life, so there's lots to draw on. So there you go. Yeah.
So that's our connection. We go way back, and Steve and his business partner Dave Ziglinski have been huge supporters of me over the years, and I'm just grateful for that. And but I wanted to just catch up with you, see how you're doing today. Like I know you as a friend, but I think the audience that doesn't know how you're doing, catch us up.
I'm doing fine. It's still kind of reeling from COVID and trying to sort of pick up and figure out where to put our energies. And, we missed 3 years, but the industry and technology moved so fast in that time. And most of us got on board with this kind of stuff. And I've got now a little video studio that I didn't used to have before. And so now that we're coming out of COVID and people are kind of getting back to normal, now the question is, so where do we put our energies, and I'm getting older. I can't quite do the amount of road work that I did before. Those 3 years were significant. So I aged a lot in those 3 years. So I'm getting back on the road, but I'm probably not going to go as hard as I was, but it's kind of where I get my greatest joy from. So kind of getting back to it, preparing. I've got a handful of new songs. So now we're starting to think about a new album. I got at least one or two left in me, I hope. And so we'll get working on that in the new year.
It's the cycles, hey. Like I find musicians go through these cycles of we call them album cycles, and I think not only that for you, but you're also an author. You've got some books you've written. Any more books coming from Steve Bell?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I've got some ideas, but nothing's burning, and so I don't want to write a book just to write a book. So there was a lot of call for that last. I did this little book on the church calendar year, and 7 little volumes on it, but there was a lot of appetite for it, and so I did it. I don't know. I think I want to really work on. I think I'm best as a songwriter, and so I want to make sure I can, however much time I have left, I get out the ones that need to get out and make room for them.
Because you're such a great storyteller, is there like an autobiography, like just something that just tells the stories of your journey?
I started that a couple of years ago. I started writing, and I just got bored of hearing myself talk about myself. So I don't know. I think if that was going to happen, I'd need someone else to come along and someone to, like, I don't know. It's hard for me to know what's interesting to a reader in terms of my life. When I'm in concert, I've got your eye, I've got your face. I can tell if
what's
I'm
working,
connecting.
Yeah.
And you know that because when I do my concerts, I don't even have normally even a plan of what songs I'm going to do, and so I read the audience and kind of go from there. I found with COVID and doing all the online work, and then also with writing, is that you can't see your audience, and so that's why writing is so hard. You get no visual cues of are you connecting. And so I find it hard work. So I think if I was going to do an autobiography, I'd have to have a ghostwriter, I think, and have someone else sort of determine what's interesting to people, because I'm not quite sure.
I would venture to guess that everybody who's ever had an autobiography, unless it's somebody who's completely into themselves, would have you echoed those same words. It's like, I don't know what's interesting. I don't know what people would want to hear. But I'll tell you this, every time I hear you speak, I'm interested. Honestly, I feel,
good.
Yeah, about anything and everything, like you can probably make a milkshake sound really interesting and have a cool story about it.
Well, I often get, it's kind of a funny thing, because when I started I started playing clubs in 78, and I was in bands. I was always a side guy. Never spoke a word in between songs. I just didn't really have anything unless it was hard planned, like exact, so I was super shy on stage in terms of talking. And I was again always a side guy. And then in 1989, I did sort of my first solo concert after a decade of playing in clubs and other people's bands. And I was terrified because I had nothing to say. And the minute I was on my own, stories started coming out. It was almost like a out of body experience, and going, where did you get that from, and where do you think you're going with it? And it became a mark of my work. And now people often after concerts, they'll come and at the end of the concerts, they'll say, I just love your stories so much. And they walk away and they come back and say, oh, I liked your songs too. I could call it thanks. But stories, but it makes sense though. I mean, like throughout history, civilization moves forward by telling stories, right? And stories are different than passing on, say, scientific knowledge. Here's what I want you to know about a molecule, or here's what I want you to know about, say, as a Christian, say, theology or something. But with a story, it's an open source thing. You kind of you take what you can and you insert yourself as you can, and you make your own meaning with the story. So stories are democratic in that sense, that the listener gets to decide what they're going to take from it.
Well, and like songs, in my opinion, are snapshots of an era, right? Like they sort of take a picture of the time that you're alive. So all these songs that you've written are stories, but also pictures of the eras.
That's why we call a collection of them an album. It's like a photo album, but this is a song album. So this is what was happening prior to 2008 when I put the album out. These 12 songs are the snapshots of the year and a half before that.
So Signpost Music is your record company that you and your business partner Dave Zaglinski started a number of years ago. I'm intrigued by this story. I love hearing the story about how it began, because I know when you first started, it was a big leap of faith to figure out how to even get this thing off the ground, especially bringing other people into it. So can you share us the story of Signpost, how it began?
Yeah. The whole time I was playing clubs and all these other bands, people kept on saying, you should go solo. I'm going, no, I don't have it. I just didn't have any confidence in that. And then it was like 89, somewhere around there, I'm going to have to just use spiritual language as I understand it. But I just really felt God spoke to me and said, you're to do this. And it was powerful enough that I kind of launched out and recorded an album and started accepting invitations to go sing, and I was terrified, and I didn't know how to. I'm not a good business guy, and I'm like just a wake of mess behind me everywhere I go. But I started it, and I was playing for a couple of years, just finding my own gigs. And meanwhile, my buddy Dave Zaglinski, who I'd known for decades, had a commercial recording studio in Winnipeg. And we had known each other for a long time. We're good friends. I wrote commercials for him in lieu of studio time so I could do my own stuff, that kind of thing. And I went to him one night and I just said, boy, I could sure use some help with this next album. I had no money and I had some songs. And he said, why don't I fund it and record it and we'll become business partners on that album. So we became 50-50 business partners on that particular album. And now that he had an investment, he started showing up to concerts. And realized that that sound was really crappy. And so he'd start bringing a PA and better mics. And then he'd realize that I was never getting to the back to set up at that time, cassettes. And so I was losing sales. And so he started, coming early and setting up a table. And then he started realizing, a lot of people had credit cards now. And so he got a credit card machine. And then he started saying, well, if we offer buy two, get one free, we might do better. And he started experimenting with the money end of it. And he's just... He wasn't sort of from the same background I was from, so he wasn't sort of hampered. Like his imagination wasn't hampered. He started going, if you put the table here rather than there, you get 20% more sales. Like he would notice that kind of thing, And so like I'm starting to make money, and just because someone is taking care of business, and then at one point he was really tired of the recording industry. He was doing commercials and stuff, and it's like being a private eye. Like, you get maybe a couple good cases here and there, but it's mostly just watching people that,
Right.
And he was looking for something more meaningful. And he just said, why don't we just partner 50-50 in all things Steve Bell? And he'd already kind of proven himself. And I don't know if you're interested in these details. I remember saying to him, I can't afford you. I can't afford to split.
This is the detail I want. Yeah, I remember this part.
Yeah. And I just wasn't making enough. I can't take on another full-time partner. My wife and I are poor. We have kids. And Dave said, I think at that point I was averaging about $2,000 a month, and roughly. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, why don't we become business partners? But from now on, the first $2,000 that comes in the door is yours. And then anything, if I can make more by my participation, I get my next $2,000 after that. And if it gets more than that, then we split. And he came on board full time with me and never missed a paycheck.
Is that still the deal to this day?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we've never really no, because we did eventually incorporate. So now,
right.
yeah,
you're just
so
paying
now
each other's salaries, and
yeah. So now it's an even thing. But that was sort of we had he wrote out a little paragraph sort of statement, and I signed it, and he signed it, and that was the deal. And a couple of times we had some lean moments, and he sort of put some of his assets on the line so that we could make.
Put his assets on the line.
I was hoping you'd pick up on
Fair
that.
Enough,
So we somehow managed to survive, and it's kind of weird because I've got a fairly limited. I'm a sort of a Christian folkie in the prairies, like the idea that this could sustain. One salary, never mind two. Now it's 5 and a studio, and it just seemed unthinkable, but it's worked.
I think it's worth applauding because what I've witnessed in Signpost, and albeit things have changed and evolved and not quite the same as it once was, but you've existed through a pandemic. You've, from my view, looks like you've been surviving and hopefully thriving in a way. And and I think a big part of that is the way you've engaged your fan base to continue to support what you do. But I don't know if there's a whole lot of models that can do what you do that I've seen, and I've been in the industry for 15 years. Your situation is incredibly unique and it's such a strength I see.
Oh, thanks. And again, like it's something to also the culture that I'm singing into. Here's the deal. My audience is generally Christians, for the most part. There's lots of non-Christians that appreciate my music, but mostly it's Christian people. They have their own buildings. They gather. I can access them. I know where they are, and so it's a little different than if I was going to say I wrote music for 20 to 30-year-old guys. Well, how do you access them?
How do you reach them? Yeah.
How do you reach them? I know where my main core audience is every Sunday morning.
Right.
And so it was easy to tap in. And then the other thing is that that audience also understands mission. and so they'll support it financially. And so, we've been supported by concert, revenue and CD revenue and all that kind of stuff. But there's also a significant group of people that appreciate what I do and help me financially once a month and or once a year, and that's just made the difference and made it doable. So I'm very fortunate that way.
Well, you guys have built a really strong model to make that work. I was going to say too, didn't you guys for a while have like T-shirts saying "Everybody needs a Dave Ziglinski" or something like that?
Yeah, I found my Dave.
Yeah.
So I do this. I've talked to like Dave, my manager. For those who are listening or watching, he's fairly unique. And I mean, he's my manager, but I'm his only client. Like, we're just business partners. It's not like he's got 10 other people. And so we're just together on everything. We travel everywhere together. I almost never get on a plane without him. We stay in the same hotel room, and we plot together, and we kind of take our lumps together and take our victories together. And I've talked to so many musicians over the years, and I'll say, like, how's it going? And they'll say, I haven't found my Dave yet.
Well, I'll say a shout out to my Laurie Brown. I feel like it's very, very similar to you and Dave. I mean, albeit we're not staying in the same hotel rooms and we're not traveling on the same planes all the time. But she really has been, like, when I think of you and Dave, I think left brain, right brain. Like, you're the artist, you're very like connected to the people, where Dave is like, here's what needs to happen in order to make these things happen. And
he's got the discipline to do those things.
Right, And I think between Laurie and I, it's very much the same thing. And so again, I've learned from your model, and I sought until a Dave came into my world by the name of Laurie Brown.
That's great, but you need it though. I mean, I think a lot of young musicians don't quite understand this, but it's a business, right? And if you like cooking and you want to cook for a living, you can't just open up a space and start cooking. You have to have a relationship with a bank, and you have to pay back loans, and you have to stay up late at night, and you have to do all the stuff that you don't like doing. And I think artists sometimes think that the best thing that could happen is someone could just take away everything, and so all they have to do is their heart's desire, which is to write music. And I think sometimes that's about the worst thing that can happen. I think you need to learn, and I think about artists that are doing well at sort of at a smaller, like the Brothers Landreth. David. Like, he gets it. He does the books. He's really good at the bank. He makes sure the taxes are paid. Like, you're not sort of running away from anybody, And so when that happens, people kind of go, oh, and they see there's discipline and there's responsibility, and then they want to get on board, And then people all of a sudden say, hey, can I be part of this? So I've had the good fortune, because Dave, like, I'm talking about Dave. I'm messy. I'm sloppy. Like, and if it was just me, I would have been finished years ago. But because Dave keeps things tidy and clean and neat, and pays attention to those details, other people come along and say, "Oh, I want to be part of that."
So you guys coexist. You very much coexist.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
We're talking very much about business. I want to get personal in just a minute with you, Steve. But before we do that, this show being called Through the Fire. When you look back at business, you've just gone through the pandemic, but is there a particular season or a thing where you went through, you thought, this is it, we're done, and you pulled through? What was that season?
Well, there's been several, and they usually they're not catastrophic, but like little things, like you put out an album, you put all your mail outs, all that kind of stuff, and then the postal service goes on strike just before Christmas, and all of a sudden, you're sitting on, $60,000 of borrowed money on short term, and you can't get your product to the market. Stuff like that has happened several times to us. And so I remember one time exactly that, how we came up with an album, we spent some good money on it, we made a great record, and then and this is before.
Which record was that?
I think it might have been, I can't remember now. I mean, it might have been Simple Songs, or I can't remember. But all I remember is that all of our mailouts went out, and then nobody could respond, and we're sitting on all this stock and short-term loans. And I remember Dave and I were out the East Coast, and we're kind of touring, and we're out of money. And I said to Dave, or Dave said to me, he said, you know what, let's give another 2 or 3 months. If we can't turn this around, maybe we're going to have to just call it quits and do something else. And we're driving down the road, and we're quiet. And then we both burst out laughing because we have no skills. Like, if we can't do this, we got nothing else. So I think, we could tell the story about our bravery and our tenacity and all that kind of stuff. But we're in it because we just have no other options. It's not like I could go, what else would I do if I can't do this? So we had to stay in. And we had to fight through, and we had to borrow money, and we had to ask people for favors. And I've got story after story of sort of have to eat humble pie and ask people to help. The thing about music, though, and art in general, is it's for the people. And when you do it for yourself, you're kind of on your own. But when you do it for the people want to be part of it. If you ask, they'll help. And we have just gotten help over and over and over. And one of the things that's been really kind of negative in the last, 30, 40 years is that I think, especially in music, but we've started to think that songwriting is about self-expression. I'm gonna sort of tell you my deep inner genius, for your benefit or something, or my deep inner angst or my unique sorrows or all that kind of stuff. And that's okay. There's a certain attraction to it. But in the end, after a while, it gets a bit icky. But if you can do your work in a sense that you're being truthful about your life, but you're doing it in a way to help people articulate their life as well. They receive it as a gift, and they're willing to help. It's for them.
We're just going to take a quick break, and we're going to get personal with Steve Bell in just a minute on Through the Fire. So, Steve, we've talked a lot about business. We've gone through some of the highs and lows of that. In your personal life, I know, because we're friends, I know some of your personal journey, and again, I don't want to tell your story for you, but I know we were just chatting yesterday, and you had talked about, if it's okay for me to go there, you talked about your mom facing a mental illness when you were a young man, and maybe even a child. Like, I don't know how old you were when you were watching your mom go through that, but if you don't mind, could you take me back to that season of your life?
Yeah, I was about 8 years old. So my father's a pastor. He's a Baptist minister. And we were in Drumheller, Alberta at 7, 8 years old, living a sort of a nice, sort of pleasant life. Everything was fine as far as I was able to tell. I had 2 loving parents and 2 sisters. One day my mother, from my perspective, out of the blue, I mean, Dad knew she was struggling before this, but I wouldn't have known. But she just collapsed. And I remember I was out in the front lawn with my sisters, and my mom was bringing out a tray of lemonade. And she kind of looked at us and then called out my dad's name and crashed to the ground. And the ambulance came, and they took away my mom, and I didn't see her for 6 months. And it was
at 8 years old, you say?
Yeah. And it was a crippling nervous breakdown. I don't know, if they probably have different language for it now. Anxiety disorder, panic attack, all that kind of stuff. And it sort of came on her in her mid-30s and completely devastated our family.
Can I stop you for a sec? Was there anything that you think would have triggered that? Was there some past traumas maybe she had been carrying, or was it kind of just surprising to you? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. She was brought up in a fairly violent disciplinary family, and so there was a lot of religious language behind it to justify it. And so, I mean, that's the worst, eh? I'm going to hurt you and God's on my side and I'm the parent and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty awful. And so, there was deep trauma for my mom for sure. And so that got the best of her, and she ended up for the rest of my life, for the rest of her life, and she's still living. She's 91 now. But she has episodes, sometimes 2, 3, or 4 years at a time, where she's incapacitated by mental illness. And then she'll fight her way to the top and be just awesome for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then it hits her again. And that's been all the way through our life. So we got, I don't want to say get used to it, but it sort of was just part of our story that would come and go. And I'm not complaining about her. I adore her. Like, she's magnificent. But that's our story. And that's just part of what we had to deal with as, my dad had to often parent by himself, and we had to help us kids understand what it's like to watch your mother suffer. And of course, as a child, whose fault is it and who's to blame? And my dad was really gracious about that. He did understand, even for the era, more than I think most people normally would have. And he taught us kids how to be hospitable to my mom's illness, and to be gracious. And when my mom was spinning out, we were taught how to not take that, internalize that. It's not our fault. Those sorts of things. So my dad was very wise, and my mom also. Like, even in her darkest times, I always knew I was loved. but she was often not emotionally available, and so I guess that marks you somehow.
Sounds like to me your dad was a guide for you guys through all that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He really did. I mean, he was never, I mean, a lot of times, boy, I don't know how much, especially in that sort of kind of Christian world and that mindset, often it's, everything becomes spiritual. How do we, my dad would actually read books in psychology and talk to psychiatrists and psychologists and understand as best as he could what this is. And of course, some of it is spiritual, and, we pray and we have faith and all those kind of things. But he did learn about mental illness in a way that a lot of people at that age, at that time, didn't pay much attention to. And so he was able to help us to kind of make sense of it, in a sense, and realize that my sisters and I and my dad, this was our situation that we were given, and our job was to love and care for our mom, and to learn how to receive or how to absorb her emotional absences in a way that wasn't personally wounding. It wasn't her fault and it wasn't our fault.
As a father, your kids would have grown up, obviously knowing your parents and connected to them. How did your children connect with your mom and
Well, but when Nancy and I got married, my mom and dad were out in the East Coast. And so my kids kind of grew up with their grandparents. They loved their grandparents, but they were distant, And so whenever we saw them...
a couple times a year kind of thing.
Yeah, a couple times a year. So they didn't really grow up with the trauma of that, for sure. I mean, they knew about it. I've always been open about it. The great thing about that is that Dad was able to let us know that mental illness there's nothing to be ashamed of. And so I've just never been embarrassed about it. I'd never speak in hushed tones about my mom's illness or anything like that.
We have this Let's Talk movement over the last 20 years-ish. Maybe I'm wrong on that time frame, but it sounds to me like you guys were already ahead of the curve, and everybody's saying, let's talk about these things because we need to be open about sharing the struggles, because we so often put on this facade of everything's great but really there's a lot going on in the back end for
of
a lot of us.
Yeah. And why are we ashamed of it? If I break my arm, I'm not going to hide it from you. My arm's broken. I get you to sign it.
Yeah. Right.
I'm wounded, right? And it weirdly, when you're a kid, you break your arm, you celebrate it, you get all the signatures, and everybody treats you special. And we're frail, And so why mentally should it surprise us if there's brokenness or whatever? And I find I'll talk about my mom, and it's okay. Mom has given me permission to do that in concert, and then afterwards, and I see this all the time. And you know how people line up after a concert, they want to talk to you, and you told this story, and so they want to connect to it, and they want to tell you their story, and that's part of the fun of this work, But there's always, I can tell, 4 people down, there's someone standing there, and I know what's coming. I can see it in their body, and they get up to you, and they'll lean over and quietly say, "Do you know what you said about your mom?" And I go, "Yeah," and I'll whisper back, "Yeah," and then they'll say, "Me too," and I'm like, "Why are we whispering?" And I understand. I understand there's social consequences to these things but
you're kind of letting people into a bit of a safe space when you go to that place.
Of course you're broken. Mm-hmm. Of course I'm broken. What,
right.
and I think, now here's what's interesting. When my mom first got ill, my dad, the church that we were in, and it wasn't a fault of the church, the society in general just really had a struggle with my mom's mental illness. It was awkward. And right around that time, my dad took a position as a prison chaplain in Drumheller Prison as a boy. And interestingly, and that's where we went to church from then on. Every Sunday we went to church in a federal prison. And interestingly, the inmates had no problems with my mom being ill. It just sort of welcomed these broken people, welcomed our broken family into their fellowship. And honestly, I would say they saved us. The attitude is sort of we're your people. We're, join the fellowship of the messed up. And so being well and being whole was not a requirement of their community, of being a belonging. In fact, your brokenness was almost the ticket in.
Wouldn't that be amazing if more churches thought that way now?
Yeah, I know. And it is getting better.
I think so. I believe
in places.
so.
Yeah,
I believe
in places.
So.
Yeah, it is getting better. But I mean, I don't know why we're so weirded about it, but anyways, it was prison inmates that interestingly were the ones that gave our family and my mom a safe place to recover and get better.
If you don't mind, I'm going to switch gears on you here. What's coming up for you? I know you said you got some albums in the work, album, I'm not sure, but then I know you're probably back on the road a little bit. And
yeah, I'll do most of my road work between September and December, and then it gets a little lighter through January, February, March. And then I typically don't do much in the late spring and summer because people want to be outdoors. I'm not really good outdoors. Being a storyteller, I kind of need a more like enclosed environment where people are going to pay attention, So if there's wind or mosquitoes, I just find it annoying, and it's like, look at me, So this is now typically the time I read the books I didn't get to and try to write some new songs and then get ready for the fall. And so, boy, I just had a meeting with my manager about a Kickstarter campaign for the next album. So because we want to start recording by late fall or early January next year, the next album. Yeah. But I'll be hard on the road again, September.
Well, if you want to co-write, I'm happy to do that with you sometime. We did. Yes, we did. In your kitchen one time, we did.
Yeah, we should do something like that.
Yeah.
I find co-writing hard because you're so vulnerable. Like
it is.
It takes me so long to come up with one decent line, So I find it's like, I don't want you to know how awful I am at this, but I have had a couple of really good co-writing experiences. So,
and ours probably not one of them.
Well, you do it a lot, don't you?
Ever since I kind of jumped more into the country community, I've done a lot more collaborative writing, and I do enjoy it because it gets me out of my incubated thought. Like often,
right.
So my process with writing has been, I write this down, I think this is brilliant, and then I share it, and people go, I don't really get that. But so when you've got 2 or 3 other minds in the room,
right,
then people kind of go, that I can see that picture, and then it helps just refine the song imagery.
Yep.
And so that's definitely helped me. I'm a very feely guy. I write about feelings, where people really need pictures, and I think that's something I've been working on a lot more in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, you being in my studio yesterday and watching you and Murray write a song off the spot and record it and stuff, it was and it was good. Like I didn't hear the finished product. I had to leave before the end of the day, but I just find that astonishing.
That's the magic of Murray Pulver. I call him the pulverizer. Yeah.
The pulverizer, yeah. He is pretty amazing, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a brilliant
fearless.
Guy. Yeah, he's fearless, but also everything he does, he approaches seemingly to me with a smile on his face.
Yep.
So we'll have to have him on maybe one of these days.
Yeah, he's a humble guy, and you can be fearless when you're humble. Like if you're not defending an ego, you can try anything, right? And so and he really is, for those of you listeners that don't know him, he's a Winnipeg producer, singer-songwriter, extraordinary. We've done
one of the founding members of Doc Walker, or maybe not founding, but was definitely key in their heyday for sure. And
key figure in Brothers Landreth and
produced
several others.
2 or 3 of their albums now, or probably almost a bit of everything he's had his hand in. So
good guy.
Yeah, and he works right there, right in that studio, right behind you.
Yeah, this is kind of where his spot is. He spends a lot of time in the studio.
Well, I know we're shouting out Murray Pulver, but Steve, I want to shout out to you. Thanks, my friend, for diving a bit into your story for us and telling us about some of the fires you've been through and how you got through them. I always appreciate your thoughts through it all, and appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate you too. I'm glad to do this at the same time, in the same season, on the same planet as you, my friend.
As I always say, it takes a village to run things here at Through the Fire, and I want to thank my village, executive producer Sarah Burke, administrators Lori Brown and Alan Greyeyes, video and audio design by Chris Gaudry and his team at 44 Films, Feisty Creative for their design work, social media support by Johnson Design Company, and last but far from least, I want to thank our technical producers, Matt Kundle and Evan Serminski from the Sound Off Media Company. I look forward to sharing more great conversations just like this one on the next Through the Fire. You see the light.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.